Hello and welcome to Africa Amplified, Bloomberg's monthly show, bringing the continent's biggest stories to the world. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja in Johannesburg. This month, we get presidential as Joe Biden makes his first and only trip to Africa as president, just weeks before leaving office, in a visit some see as a counter to China's growing influence on the continent. We'll discuss what his trip means for the future of U.S.-Africa relations as Donald Trump prepares to return to the White House. And sticking with that theme, South Africa takes over the presidency of the G20, but will its multilateral aims clash with Trump's America First policy? Plus, Ghana goes to the polls to elect a new president against a backdrop of economic hardship. We'll take a look at the biggest challenges facing the next administration. All that and more coming up in the next half hour. But first, an update on some of the top stories we're following from across the continent, as we always do. We'll have the latest from Kigali in the east and Cape Town in the south. But let's start with news out of Nigeria in West Africa. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu returned from a three-day trip to France where he met with Emmanuel Macron just before the French president's government fell to a no-confidence vote. Now, Tinubu aimed to attract foreign investment back to his country as he touted the impact of his reform programs.
We've been working on stabilizing the security system in Nigeria, and we are getting closer and closer. We are doing better now in the area of security. I can assure all the investors here that Nigeria is open for business.
And for more, let's get to Bloomberg's Ruth Oluronbi, who is in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. So, Ruth, thanks so much for joining us. You are following Tinubu all the time. Talk to us about how this visit to France ties in with his broader strategy, really for the country and also for attracting more foreign direct investment back to Nigeria.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. I think that the deals that Nigeria announced that is signed in France are indicators to the president's ambition towards attracting investments in Nigeria. For instance, we saw Total's Energy committing $750 million towards developing its gas field. And oil and gas has been one key area where the president sees investments coming in. We also see Nigerian government announcing that it signed an agreement with the French government towards developing the mineral sector, which again is another key area where the president sees investments coming in. And he has been developing some and also implementing some reforms in that area and giving incentives such as tax breaks for the mineral sector and also improving security in those areas. So I think those are key areas where the president sees investments coming in, and we saw that in France.
Yeah, and we've obviously seen the president really try to hone in and at least show some support for the reforms that he's been doing. Let's just turn, though, to what we've seen from the central bank, Ruth, because we've heard a bit of, I guess, a little bit of hesitation from Cardoso in terms of rate cuts, but potentially now signaling inflation may be cooling and we could see it coming on the way. Can you just talk about what he's saying now?
I mean, it's the governor of Central Bank, Olayemi Cardoso, did say that he sees inflation cooling in the future. But you have to also put in mind that Nigeria's inflation is still at almost 34%, and two out of three Nigerians are still hungry. But if you look at the key drivers of inflation in Nigeria, such as the price of gasoline, the pressure on the naira, those seem to be easing and stabilizing. But I think that by January, we should be able to know exactly what the health of the economy looks like.
Yeah, where an economy where we've seen inflation skyrocket a bit. Bloomberg's Ruth Oluronbi out of Abuja, Nigeria. Ruth, thanks so much for joining us. Now to South Africa, Southern Africa. Namibia has elected its first female president after the ruling party held onto power in a disputed election. It was the worst ever electoral showing for SWAPO, which has governed since independence in 1990. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Matthew Hill. So, Matt, why were these elections so controversial controversial. And what should we expect then from Namibia's new leader?
Hi, Jen. Thanks very much. Yeah, as you point out, Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah will become Namibia's first female president, and she takes over at a time when the Southwest African nation is preparing to cash in on an oil and gas boom. Companies like TotalEnergies and Shell discovered massive hydrocarbon natural resources off the country's west coast. And Nandi-Ndaitwah has already spoken about the need to find a balance between ensuring that the local population benefits enough from the natural resources. Namibia also is extremely rich in minerals like uranium and diamonds, while at the same time ensuring that investors make the profits that they are there for. Namibia is one of the world's most unequal countries, and it's also got very high poverty rates and unemployment rates too. So finding that balance will be critical. The elections were controversial because though there were less than 1.5 million registered voters, turnout was high. More than 3/4 of those did arrive to cast their votes, and queues were very long. By 5 a.m. the following morning, many people were yet to cast their votes, and there was shortage of ballot papers, problems with the biometric machines. And because of these issues and others, the opposition parties have indicated that they intend to challenge the election results in court.
And that's a similar theme that we've seen a bit throughout the continent and these elections that we've seen this year. Bloomberg's Matthew Hill in Cape Town. Matthew, thanks so much. Let's go to East Africa now. Tanzania will honor its 30-year concession agreement with the Adani Group to operate a container terminal in Dar es Salaam. That's despite the U.S. bribery probe of Indian billionaire Gautam Adani. But hours after the indictment, neighboring Kenya canceled $2.6 billion worth of airport and power transmission contracts that tycoon conglomerates had pitched for. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Ndiro Oganga, who has been following this story from us in Kigali. So, Ndiro, Tanzania and Kenya have taken different approaches to dealing with the Adani Group. What's behind this?
Hi, Jen. So Tanzania says there was no breach of contract in the agreement with Adani and everything was done within the confines of the law. And they say that the rights of investors are also protected by the constitution, so they just can't wake up and drop the deal. And Tanzania and Adani signed a deal that will see Adani ports operate two of the largest terminals in the port of Dar es Salaam for a period of 30 years. Another reason why they're very keen to move forward with this deal is their president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, wants to turn it into a regional hub. And she is fast-tracking mega infrastructural projects in the country so they can be able to compete with the port in Durban and also the port in Mombasa. On the contrary, the Adani deal was unpopular in Kenya. They wanted to build and operate the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport for a period of 30 years for only $1.9 billion. And people went to court saying that this deal will bring unforeseen financial burden to Kenyans. And also, the economic benefits are very little. So due to this pushback, those charges were a perfect alibi for the government to drop this deal.
Bloomberg's Ndiro Oganga have been following this story for us. Ndiro, great to have you on so much. Thank you so much. Now, coming up, President Biden, as we mentioned, makes a landmark visit to Angola and doubles down on his commitment to help support the Lobito corridor project. The CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, the institution supporting the financial negotiations of the project, spoke to Bloomberg from Luanda on the margins of the trip. We'll leave you his comments on the global cooperation in funding the project.
We're going to make a significant financial contribution to the development of the project. Our partners, the AFDB, are also making significant contribution for the viability. Are also not going to make their announcement. They'll make their announcement themselves. The government of Italy has recently joined, and they've also pledged, I think about 300 million, for the development of the project. So all in all, I think we're in a good place. I think that we have what it takes to deliver on this project. And I know that there's a lot of anxiety, about U.S. government involvement. Right. And I think that we have bipartisan support. I keep saying it.
A few months ago, the DRC sent the first copper shipment on this railway for transit onward to the United States. The trip used to take 45 days to get to the United States from that. But now it takes less than 45 hours. 45 hours because of the changes you've made. It's a game changer.
This facility will now be able not just to take in raw materials from its outgrowers in a scheme, small-scale farmers, having input supply to them, having an off-take, assured market, a fair price, improves their lives. This is great, but also be able to export beyond Angola and beyond Africa. This is what Africa needs today.
Zambian leader Hakainde Hichelima and U.S. President Joe Biden there, alongside some other presidents, as the United States pledges more money for the multi-country Lobito rail project during Biden's trip to Angola. Now, joining us now to talk more about this is Ziyanda Sturrman. She is a senior analyst for Africa at the Eurasigroup, joining us from Cape Town. So, Ziyanda, thanks so much for being here. You did have an opinion column that you wrote in a local paper talking about a preview to this Biden trip, but you said that Biden will want his upcoming visit to be a sign of the times. Is that what was achieved, in your opinion?
I think so. By all accounts, the trip itself was a success. In terms of highlighting both the potential, but also really the current benefits of the Lobito project. This is a huge infrastructural undertaking, and that's deeply supported by the US, the EU, and others who are looking for, I think, real market access to critical minerals in Southern Africa.
You talk about market access. Is that the main benefit, you think, from a project like this? Or what is the benefit that a lot of these G7 partners are getting from this partnership?
I think it's, on the one side, very practically market access, both into Southern Africa, but also for those critical minerals from the region out to the US and the EU. And I think also, really importantly, it's the deepening of economic and diplomatic ties, between, again, Zambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. And those are all really deeply held goals for the governments of those countries who are looking to invest or looking for investments from, I think, a wide source, and trying to, I think, really widen their investment base past a country like China, for example.
But Ziyanda, I mean, much of the follow-through with this project is going to fall on incoming President-elect Trump. What's your expectation there? Do you think that the administration will prioritize it in the same way that we've seen with this current administration?
So the interesting thing there is that I think, it's better, honestly, for the project to not necessarily be on Donald Trump's radar or front page. We have seen in the first Trump administration that Africa wasn't particularly important, but in the background, there were some really interesting initiatives, especially around infrastructure financing and trade and investment on the continent through, programs such as Prosper Africa, as well as the creation of the International Development Finance Corporation. So this doesn't have to be a priority for Trump himself, but it certainly, I think, if this project stays in the background, but can show real benefit for the U.S., again, in their rivalry with China in particular, then it benefits everybody. It's a win-win-win, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, as I said, top of the agenda for Trump himself.
And yet, Ziyanda, we're still seeing China outpace the U.S. and others on foreign direct investment to Africa. Do you expect that will continue and Africa then will just be the beneficiary of a lot more investment because this Lobito project seems to be at least an early success?
That's a really good question, and I think only time will tell. The domestic politics across all three of these countries, and we haven't necessarily even mentioned Tanzania, which is a possible expansion point as well. The domestic politics in all of those countries are going to have to be favorable, to, again, the expansion and the growing of an opportunity like the Lobito corridor. So I think all of the ingredients are there for many of the countries countries, both in the region, on the continent, to really benefit from what is at this point a really, really interesting geopolitical rivalry, and one that Africa can absolutely capitalize on. But it doesn't matter what the individual governments, involved in a project like Lobito and other future investments, how they're going to be shaped, how they're going to, position themselves to really take advantage.
And Ziyanda, let's just finish on the G20. South Africa took over the presidency. How do you think potentially they can carry the mantle? We've heard Ramaphosa say this is about Africa and prioritizing Africa for the globe. What's your take?
I think that's very broadly true. That's been a hallmark of Ramaphosa's administration, where foreign policy didn't really quite take shape until I think the second half of his first term in office. But now it is really quite laser focused on common issues, that affect African countries, that really run the gamut from, climate change adaptation and equitable access to global financing, as well as equitable access to pharmaceuticals and life-saving vaccines. I think that'll be very much a focus for South Africa's G20 presidency. And I would expect, in the same way that Ramaphosa and his administration invited many African leaders to the BRICS summit in Johannesburg in August 2023, I would expect the same, going into this year's G20, especially given that the African Union is now also a member of the G20.
Absolutely. And they did say they believe Trump will attend, so time will tell. But great to get you on and get your insights. Ziyanda Sturrman, Senior Analyst for Africa at the Eurasigroup, there with us in Cape Town. Thanks so much. Now, coming up, Ghana heads to the polls to elect a new president in the backdrop of economic hardship and a debt crisis. We'll explore the challenges facing the country's next leader. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. Well, it's been a year of profound political change in Africa and really the globe, with voters punishing ruling parties in South Africa, Botswana, Senegal, and Mauritius. And now Ghanaians are set to follow suit when they go to the polls on Saturday. With the president stepping down, the ruling party is fielding Mahamudu Bawumia as its candidate. But opinion polls suggest a decisive win for ex-president and opposition leader John Mahama. Here's a look at the economic backdrop to the election and the challenges facing the next administration.
Investor confidence in Ghana was high and foreign direct investment was climbing, while multinationals from Microsoft to Unilever to Société Générale had operations in the country. Things started going wrong, though, as a growing debt burden spurred a surge in inflation to a 21-year high amid a slide in the currency, the cedi. The country defaulted, and after tough negotiations, a restructuring with the IMF followed. Some of these blue chips pulled out, and the crisis spilled onto the streets as the soaring cost of living strangled the economy. But today, there are some positive macro signs to greet the winner of this year's presidential election. Ghana's economy grew 6.9% in the second quarter, the fastest pace in 5 years. And Moody's raised its credit rating outlook for the nation's debt in October. The country's political leaders, though, will need to build on this momentum as they look to repair investor confidence, with opportunities to revive the petroleum industry and further boost its leading position as Africa's biggest gold miner. All this as Ghana services its newly restructured debt and looks to restore foreign direct investment, returning what was once the continent's rising star to the path of economic stability.
Now, for more on Ghana's elections and the main challenges facing the country, let's bring in Bloomberg's senior reporter, Yinka Ibukan, in Accra, Ghana. Yinka, talk to us about what investors are expecting from this election.
So, first and foremost, Jen, investors are expecting peaceful elections, and Ghana has a good track record in that regard. But then in terms of the foreign direct investors, like the ones that you've mentioned, they'll be looking for an improved business environment and also signs that households' purchasing power is being restored after being battered by inflation. For bond investors, many of them have been affected by this restructuring, through which Ghana restructured most of its $30 billion external debt. And so for them, it will be about Ghana showing that it's ready to be fiscally responsible, spending less and earning more, so that they can get restored confidence in this market.
And Yinka, one of the main challenges that Ghana has is with illegal gold mining. You actually have a story out right now just about that. What are we hearing from the candidates about their solutions to fix that?
So illegal gold mining is a multifaceted issue, and we're in a context where Ghana really can't afford to forego revenue that could help prop up its economy. For that reason alone, it's quite urgent that something is done about it. But it's also a social issue because people are literally risking their lives to go get gold, and also an environmental issue with widespread pollution. What used to be the case is that both parties had done crackdowns to clamp down on illegal miners. But increasingly, their discourse is about formalizing the sector and figuring how to capture the revenue while also promoting responsible mining practices. It remains to be seen if there will be political will to follow through on these pledges.
So, Yinka, do you think something is going to change in regards to this issue anytime soon? Maybe just in 30 seconds or so.
It has to change, Jen. It's been like this for a long time, but it does have to change. I think everyone understands that. But it's quite a complex issue, which is probably why it's lasted this long. And it's really about political will.
All right, we'll leave it there, and everyone should definitely check out Yinka's story that is now available on the Bloomberg now. Bloomberg's senior reporter, Yinka Ibukun, in Accra, Ghana. Yinka, thanks so much for your reporting and for joining us. And before we go, author and columnist Shiku Kamira joins our podcast Next Africa this week to discuss the continent's ongoing issue of brain drain. It's available now and every Friday on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you usually get your podcasts. Well, that's all we have time for today. Join us again next month and next year. From me, Jennifer Zabasaja, it's goodbye from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for joining us.